A few months back, the New York Times wrote about how since 1990, there's been a startling rise in U.S. pedestrian deaths caused by vehicles. Now, digging a little bit more deeply, the newspaper uncovered that the increase in these life-ending crashes was a result of activity at night and didn't quite know what to do with that. And I don't think we know what to do with it. So that report inspired this particular 24-Hour Nation web panel. I welcome you and thank you for registering for In the Headlights. Our guests today are Kia Wilson. Kia is senior editor for the daily news source Streetsblog USA. If there is one media source that is got the advocates for walkability and bikeability of our cities with a swinging sword, it is Streetsblog. And I'm so glad that you are here, Kia, because I know that you know how to wield that sword. Nick Messler is an urban planner and transportation engineer with Ivari GIS Consulting. Ivari GIS is kind of leading the way in helping cities visualize traffic harm at night. And I'm so glad you're here, Nick. Nick was the first to kind of sign on board. Trained as an architect, Chiara Molinar is a project manager for pedestrian policy, hospitality, and the use of public spaces in Paris. The one in France, not the one in Texas. Paris, what's going on in Paris has been coined in urban planning circles as the French Revolution. They are gaining great attention and admiration for shifting to a pedestrian model that prioritizes those who walk, bike, and roll. And I'm very pleased. And you also have a little party coming up this summer called the Olympics. So I'm very glad you're with us. My name is Randall White. I am the founder of 24-Hour Nation. 24-Hour Nation is a non-commercial project, if you will, that produces free webinars and a podcast. We also curate information for nighttime economy advocates around the globe, just to elevate the whole discussion of our nighttime economy and the potential and challenges in our cities. Over the next hour, here's what you can expect. Those of you that have dialed in, you will hear from each of our panelists on the dual topics of what planners call active transportation, non-motorized transportation, and active transportation at night. The panelists may or may not be able to respond to any chat or questions you submit during the panel, but I will triage some of them at the end of the hour and make sure some of your questions get put in front of our guests, experts. This web panel is being recorded and will be posted at 24hournation.com. Will that also be posted, we think, at Streetsblog USA, Kia? Lovely. I love that. All right. Insights for our panelists on who's registered for this session. For this program, we received registrations from around the planet, from Australia, good morning, to those in Mexico, USA, Canada, Ireland, where pedestrian issues are political right now. The UK, France, Spain, Italy, and other locations that I'm not easily able to identify just from names and email addresses. I have seen, though, in who registered, nighttime advocacy organizations leaders that are usually the audience for our webinars, transportation, infrastructure, lighting, and construction engineers. Oh boy, some of your crowd, Nick, researchers and academics, including those who are focused on geographic information systems, or GIS, a concept I suspect we're going to hear a little bit about, nighttime economy consultants, some climate change realists. I love that. That certainly will be of interest to the Parisian voice. Public safety professionals. We have several urban and city planners in the mix, and at least one very well-known DJ from Ireland, which is sort of what I'm going to be today. So I am going to reintroduce our panelists and give them the time to do whatever they want. If we have a little time, I'll ask some questions, maybe, or we'll go on to the next panel. And we're going to begin with you, Kia. Thank you again for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Randall. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to be with such esteemed fellow panelists whose work I've covered and I've followed and admired a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and do the awkward thing where I share my screen first and make sure that that's all working for us. Let's get this going here. Okay. Pardon my slow internet speeds. All right.
Good.
Okay. If someone could just give me a high sign that you can see my face in
We're
double time.
good.
All right. So, as mentioned at the top, my name is Kia Wilson, and my title is Senior Editor at Streetsblog USA. And I like to say that I am an advocacy journalist covering the movement to end car dependency in the United States. And when I say car dependency, what I mean is not covering the movement to end cars, to be very clear. I'm covering the movement to make it so that the average American, and sometimes the average Canadian, every once in a while, we venture into other parts of North America, isn't functionally required to take a private automobile for the vast majority of their trips, the vast majority of the time, whether or not they want to, whether or not they can afford to, whether or not that has positive externalities for their neighbors as well. And we come at that from a whole lot of different angles, but I would say a good 50% of what I talk about is safety. So just to get like some very basic stats up on the board, I think it's pretty obvious. Let me just get my slide here. I think it's pretty obvious that one of the primary reasons in the United States why a lot of people are not taking these non-motorized or lightly motorized modes of transport is because they don't feel safe traveling outside of a private automobile. So NHTSA just released earlier this month its final 2022 numbers, and it's been a rough few years, I would say actually a rough few decades for US pedestrians and cyclists and other vulnerable road users. So in 2022, we saw 7,500 deaths about on our roadways in that year alone among the pedestrian population, over 1,100 cycling deaths. I want to be clear, when I say the word pedestrian today, though NHTSA tends to group people who use assistive devices under cyclists, certain jurisdictions do it differently. When I say pedestrians, I'm referring to pretty much anyone moving outside of an automobile who isn't on a bicycle or another micromobility device. Those deaths are increasing at a pace that's a lot faster than occupants of cars, who rose about 15%, as well as motorcyclists, which rose about 17%, bringing us to about 16% increase over a 3-year period. And I always like to get at least a couple of real names and faces to these stats because these numbers can be so overwhelming. But every single one of these numbers represents a human being with a life that deserves to be remembered and people who are missing them. So these two gentlemen are Matthew Nicolai and Ed Walter. They are two men who died in my home city of St. Louis, Missouri, where I live. They actually died on exactly the same segment of the exact same road, an intersection on a street called Chippewa, right across from a place that's a popular ice cream stand. And they both died at night. They both died on a street that has about 5 lanes of traffic that are all moving very quickly. One of the two was a hit and run death. And not very many design changes have been made to that intersection since, and there have been serious pedestrian injuries since. We like to say at Streetsblog, and the advocates that I cover like to say that all traffic deaths and serious injuries are preventable. That's what we call Vision Zero. These 2 lives could have been saved, and so could all of the other lives that are on this board right now. Matthew Nicolai was 17 years old, by the way. He was a high school senior. And Ed Walter was a 75-year-old librarian at a local university. And I just always like to hold a little moment of regard for the real people that we're talking about today, because these are all real people. So just to reference that New York Times article that Randall put up at the top, I'm going to steal a couple of graphics from them because they have a bigger graphics department than we do at Streetsblog, where I'm pretty much the only full-time journalist. A lot of these deaths are happening at night. 3 in 4 US pedestrians are dying after dark, and that's an anomaly among our peer nations. Nighttime pedestrian deaths are falling almost everywhere else in the industrialized world. And if you look at this chart on the right, you'll see that a lot of those deaths are peaking at dusk and dawn. You can see them shift as the days get longer and also as the time change happens. I'm sure my peer from Avari is going to talk a little bit about how even those numbers might be an undercount because, as they've reported very beautifully in some of their case studies, dusk and dawn deaths are often miscoded, sometimes as daytime deaths and sometimes as full nighttime deaths. But point is, our data on this is incomplete. It could be a lot better, but we know that this is a huge problem that's getting worse and that we need to pay attention to the structural factors, because all of these deaths are the consequences of structural factors that could be deployed to prevent them. So a lot of those factors, skipped one, a lot of those factors that are driving this trend apply 24 hours a day. But I would say that most of those factors are magnified, I should say, at night. So when we talk about things like dangerous road designs that encourage high speeds, especially in places where people walk, 3 out of 4 pedestrian deaths are happening on suburban arterials in the United States, on roads with usually 3 or more lanes, speeds of 35 miles per hour or more. All of those bad road design choices, in my opinion, are amplified in the nighttime hours when our traffic volumes fall and we have neither good road design nor congestion to slow drivers down. There are also higher rates of driver distraction in the US, but particularly at night, as well as impairment, drunk driving, things like that, recklessness. There was one line in the New York Times report that I'm sure many of you read that suggested that the US has higher rates of driver distraction because we tend to use an automatic transmission. We don't need to have one hand on the gear shift and one hand on the wheel when we're driving. There's been some reporting since then that apparently Canada has very similar fleet balance as we do. They have a lot of automatic transmissions and their rates of driver distraction are lower. So there are cultural factors at work here. There are structural factors we haven't examined yet at work here that we need to keep digging into. Another factor that I put a question mark next to because it is controversial and there is a lot of research still forthcoming are changes in our enforcement landscape over the last few years, particularly around the movement for more police accountability in traffic stops, which often turn deadly, specifically for people of color. We do see more police chases after dark. We do see drop-offs in certain kinds of ticketing, but that's a factor that we still need to research. And we need to think about structurally what the best way to prevent these deaths are without causing other forms of harm. Increasing vehicle size, certainly the average American SUV and pickup truck is the same size during the day as it is at night. But the impact of that can't be overstated. We know that pedestrians and cyclists are far more likely to die the bigger and specifically taller our vehicles get, for pretty basic reasons, because if you're struck by a vehicle with a high front hood, you're more likely to be hit at the level of the head, the neck, the internal organs, rather than at the level of the knees or below. You're more likely to be pushed under the car rather than thrown up onto the top of it. And again, when you're driving at night, those big cars, particularly a lot of overnight freighters and things like that, are going to be able to reach higher speeds and be more lethal. We also need to talk about things like hospital centralization and EMS response times that are increasing throughout the United States as our medical landscape changes. Add into that the fact that hospitals are less staffed after dark. That's another factor that we need to look at. And we need to talk, about the suburbanization of poverty, about people who are low income being pushed out of city cores that are gentrifying and into these environments that were not designed with people on foot and on bike in mind. And of course, a part of that is also increasing homelessness. That we don't have very good federal statistics on the percentage of pedestrians that are living on the street at the time that they are killed. But at the local level, there are cities like San Francisco have found that it's as high as like 70, 80, 90%, depending on the jurisdiction. I did want to highlight a couple of factors that are unique to the nighttime hours, some of which are emerging. So obviously, when we talk about road design, we have to talk about streetlights. And I want to also highlight specifically streetlight maintenance. So the very few cities that do anything kind of like a streetlight audit are typically, just make sure that I just had someone sign on to my audio.
We just lost your sound a little bit, Kia.
Sorry about that. Let's get that in order here.
I can barely hear you.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Just barely.
Okay, let's see what we can do. Sorry about that.
The power of the web.
All right, is my audio back? Can folks hear me
Not
now?
quite. You're low. I can barely hear you, but you're low.
Sorry sorry about that. Someone in my household signed onto a Bluetooth device that hooked up to my computer, and I'm not sure how that happened. I'm just going to speak as loudly as I can.
Okay, that will work.
Sorry about that. It's not hooking up to my external mic anymore for some reason. Okay, so some of these factors are unique to the nighttime hours. So when we talk about streetlights, we also need to talk about maintenance. Cities like Detroit have done some pretty compelling audits of their streetlight maintenance systems and found that a lot of streetlights, though they exist and we can see them on things like Google Maps, are not actually operational or are not pointed in the right direction or things like that. We also need to talk about things like advanced pedestrian automatic emergency braking systems. So there is a notice of proposed rulemaking at NHTSA right now, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, to require pedestrian automatic emergency braking. However, there is mounting evidence that a lot of those systems don't work very well at night when they're needed the most. And they also have struggled in things like bad weather. And we also just briefly need to talk about the increasing proportion of hit and runs. So hit and run deaths obviously are more common after dark for pretty obvious reasons. There's more opportunity to leave a pedestrian who you have injured as a driver to die in the streets and deny them access to the medical attention that might save their lives. To just get one very quick chart on the board, hit and run deaths have increased about 153% between 2009 and 2021, and 86% of them in the last year on record happened at night. That is an increasing proportion of pedestrian deaths that are involving hit and runs. And hit and runs, I think, are understudied, but I think are very important because they're a symptom of a broader problem that a guy named David Levinson, who I'm borrowing a chart from him here, called the cycle of unwalkability. So, you know, as I'm outlining these structural factors that lead to pedestrian deaths, particularly at night, I think that we can give the false impression that saving lives is just about addressing design factors and designing away the dangers. But I think that there's another ingredient, which is that pedestrians and cyclists and other vulnerable road users have safety in numbers. And as we make cities less walkable, and also make them places where people don't want to walk, we get into situations where we have more hit and runs, more opportunities for drivers to leave people to die, and also just fewer people walking, period. So I'll sort of leave you with that as a final thought. When we seek to end vulnerable road user deaths at night, and I believe that we can, we have to think holistically and talk not just about redesigning our infrastructure, our policy, our culture for safety, but reducing car dependency and a car culture and building vibrant places where people of all ages, abilities, and demographics actually want to walk and bike at night so that they can have those safety in numbers. So that's sort of the message I'll end us with today. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Just wanted to put my info up on the screen one more time.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Kia, so much. You opened my mind to some things I hadn't thought about, and I will reserve my questions for the end of the panel. Won't you go ahead and get set up, Kiara, and then we'll next turn to you. We'll finish out with Nick. But I appreciate the passion that you have for Kia, for the I hesitate to use the word car culture because some people get really upset when you start using that language, but it's kind of where we are in the States, and we'll see. Okay, Kiara.
Yeah, you tell me when you can see my presentation.
There we go.
Okay. So my name is Chiara Molinar. I am an architect and I work in mobility department of the municipality of Paris. And as it was told, I work on pedestrian policies and public spaces policies. So the idea of this presentation is to give you some information about how do we work in Paris, and then to have some information about road safety by night for pedestrians. Sorry. So what we just have to remember is that Paris is very different from American cities, but also from some other European cities because of the density of population and of activities on a very little area. We have about 20,000 20,000 people for square kilometers. It means that it's a very good news for walking because we can walk everywhere, but the problem is that we have a lack of space, which is a real daily problem for Parisians and a real challenge for organized mobility and for sharing public spaces. This is just a little map to remind you how easy it is to walk in Paris. And you can see, it's a walking time map. You can see the minutes it takes to go, for example, from Tour Eiffel to Notre Dame Cathedral. It's just 1 hour walk. And I think it could be less than that. I think I can walk faster than that. Or from Arc de Triomphe to Tour Eiffel, it's just 30 minutes walk. You can really walk wherever you want, and you can cover all the area of Paris by walking in a few hours. Another reason we walk a lot in Paris is because we have a lot of activities and shops and equipments that we can reach in a 5 minutes walk. What you see on this map, the blue area, it means that people living there has minimum 3 shops in a 5 minute walk from their place. And this 85% of Parisians thinks that they have everything they need close to their home, so they can really do everything by walking or cycling. The only thing they have to do with other modes is probably going to travel. And when we ask Parisians if they have any reason not to walk, most of them think no. And also, if they don't work, they can't find a reason. Another important thing to share is the mobility share in Paris. We have, it's very different, I think, from car dependency you talked about. We have in Paris 65% of population in Paris that has no car, and we mostly move by public transport, and the motorized traffic volume is decreasing. And in the last 20 years, you can see we have half of the traffic volume we had in 2002. And it's still decreasing every year. I'm sorry, I do not have data after 2022. We are just now using data from the last year. And this is important about walking because walking plays a very important role in the complementarity with public transport. When you have to get to catch a bus or to go to metro underground station, probably you will have to walk 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so it's a good reason for people to walk. So because of all these reasons, but also because of public policies, and we have 65% of trips that are made by walk on Paris, 26% by public transport, and as you can see, car are just 4 of the total trips in Paris. These data are before pandemic, and nowadays we had last few days, but I had no time to put in the presentation other more recently data, which are, we can see that we have cycling trips, the trips by bike, which are improved a lot from 2020. About walking, so we walk is the first mode for travel in Paris, and it's still increasing, 12 points from in the last 10 years. And normally it's for just short distance, less than 1 kilometer. It's the average duration of a trip is a little bit more than 10 minutes, so it's not too much, not enough for health, but still that. And we have some population that walk more than others. For example, women work a little bit more compared to men, and women also use a little bit public transport. All these data we do not have not yet the same data for night trips, but we are trying to have this information. So it's under construction, and we will have, I hope, in the next few months, this kind of information for the nighttime pedestrian mobility, but we still do not have. So pedestrian mobility it's a little bit different from other mobilities, and we have less data and information compared to other mobilities. But we are trying to get new data from GNSS data, so our mobile phones that can localize where people are walking. And on this map, you can see people walking in public spaces in Paris. And so where it's darker, you have more people walking there. As what you can see is that people walks everywhere in daytime. So this is during a week time on the day. And if we look at the same map by night, of course, we have less people on public spaces. The other ones are sleeping. And we have some white roads, white areas where we really have not many people walking. But what we can recognize on this map is that people walks more, of course, where you have bars, restaurants, and activities open by night. But also we can recognize main transport hubs. As you can see, I put some red circle on the map, and this is a map of nighttime buses in Paris, and you can recognize that where you have railway station, so you have no trains by night, but you have some buses during the night, which start from these places, and you can see that it's a little bit darker, probably also because of people going there to catch the bus for going to work, for those who work by night, and for those who were in Paris for having fun and get back home. So about road safety for pedestrian by night, we have some pretty good news in Paris, because pedestrian accidents are decreasing these last few years. This information is not just about night road safety, but day and night. But globally, they are both decreasing. So about a drop of 20% in the last in this last 3 years we studied. And it's the drop is greater for people killed or very serious accident. So it's a pretty good information for us. But we still have a problem with pedestrian, because there are 20% of the victims of all the accident in Paris, but they are very vulnerable, and there are 50%, a little bit more, of those who are killed because they have anything to protect them. So it's if they have an accident, it's immediately very, very serious. And some population, as children and seniors, are overrepresented. So it's really sad to know that, and we are trying to work on that. What we can say is also that the most of the accidents involving pedestrian is from a conflict with motor vehicle, and we have some polemics this last few months in Paris because of cycling increasing a lot and lots of problem of cohabitation between pedestrians and cyclists. But it's important to remind that the most of the accident and of the serious and fatal accidents are with cars and not with bikes. When we look at what happens by night, we have about 20% of all the accidents occurring at night that can involve a pedestrian. And some good news also for this kind of accident, because they are decreasing, the number is decreasing, so it's pretty good news. And nighttime pedestrian mortality been divided by 3 in the last few months. So the nighttime accidents are decreasing quicker than all the accidents we have in Paris. So it's a little bit different from what you said about the States. We have good news for nighttime walking. When I heard here talk about road design and also about street lights. So this is something we are starting to see if we have a problem with public lighting. So we are regarding if we have more accidents involving pedestrians where we have a problem with street lights, and we found out that it's not the reason, because the bigger proportion of accidents you can see on this graphic is with public lighting on. So it's not a problem of darkness. And we just have few accidents with a problem of street light. And it's not changing a lot in these last years. You can see from 2018 to 2023, and the color is about of age of people, from the youngest one to the older one. So as you can see, we do not have a lot of evolution. It's stable. Some other information we are trying to study is dusk and dawn in early morning and late afternoon. We have the same decreasing. So good news also. About 56% drop in all the accidents we had, and it's not varying a lot about age group, except for these people aged from 18 to 24. So we are also looking at gender distribution and to see if women and men have live different situation in public spaces, and we found out that the gender distribution is reversed for nocturnal accident. On this side, you can see women on the yellow and a man in blue color. And as you can see, we have more accident concerning women that men normally, if we have all the data from all day long. And when we just take accident by night, we can see that we have more accident concerning men, pedestrian. This is all about pedestrian, men than women. So we think we're trying to understand, but we think that this is because women walk less during nighttime compared to men, compared to what they work during the day. And this is because of the feeling of not being safe in the public space by night. So we can see by this data that probably nighttime amplify the vulnerabilities of some population as a female population, but probably it's the same for old people. It means that we have less accident by night concerning old people, but it's probably because they don't dare to walk by night because they are afraid and they don't feel safe in public space by night. And we're trying to have data about this to see if it is the real reason. We are not completely sure, and probably it's several factors.
Chiara, I'm going to want to ask if there's some highlights you can give us. I see you've got other slides here to show. I want to make sure I get time for Nick as well as some questions from people dialing in. You've got a lot of data here, a lot of information, very valuable. Any chance that you could share your slides with me so I can share them with the people who registered?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll do that. I'll follow up with you and make sure I can get a hold of those. So, but if there's a few other kind of really relevant points that you would like to make, and then I'll segue over to Nick here.
No, maybe I will just tell that what this is. You will see on the slides. Just the victims killed are decreasing also, so still good news. Just this last slide, because we recently produced a new pedestrian strategy, and there you have our 4 main goals, and probably the one where we will work about nighttime pedestrian mobility is connected to this goal, which is improve the experience of walking for everyone, everywhere, and all the time.
Lovely.
And especially for that kind of people that still have some problem in walking by night, as I told before.
Those that require mobility aids. This is fantastic. I want to move to Paris right now. And I thank you.
You're very welcome.
If you can stop the share, then we'll switch over here to Nick. Oh my gosh, Nick, bring it home for us, pal. We're talking about the infrastructure. We're talking about lighting. We're talking about dusk and dawn and defining all that. And I know you're going to speak to some of those points.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending this presentation. Randall, thank you so much for making this happen. It's important that we talk about these subjects, all the webinars that you put on. It's important. It's not talked about enough. And I'd like to thank my co-presenters. Really valuable and interesting information, and kind of teed me up pretty well. So I'm excited. A little bit about me. I'm a plan engineer. I have a background in planning and engineering. Done a lot of transportation safety projects, particularly on the West Coast of the United States. I now work for Ivari GIS Consulting. We work on street lighting projects all over the US, particularly in the form of LED conversions, and more recently, streetlight master plans. It isn't a new concept necessarily, but the way we are approaching it is. That's something I'll talk about in a little bit in depth later. I've also been a long time nighttime pedestrian and cyclist. And to prove it, here's a home video of me and my siblings. This is us in Hoboken, New Jersey. I think my dad needs his head examined for taking a bunch of kids out with the New York City yuppie bar crowd. I grew up in Hoboken. Hoboken, famous for being one of the few cities in the United States that have been able to eliminate traffic-related fatalities. That's 1 square mile city with about 60,000 people. It's a very similar population density as Paris. They've been very successful at that. In fact, one of the last people to be hit and killed by a car was my neighbor growing up. So it's nice to see some change finally making its way in Hoboken. Some of the things I'll be talking about are some of the safety data we've talked a lot about already, but I'm gonna hit on a couple more points. What warrants are, how we warrant lighting, when is lighting across the board recommended, and some larger recommendations to make note of. And then nighttime comprehensive planning, or what we do is streetlight master planning, and how we can think about approaching this topic in cities and communities that you live in and bring back with you to implement some of these strategies. Avari's business has been, for the last decade, collecting a lot of data on streetlights. We've been part of just about every major streetlight LED conversion in the United States. We did the city of Chicago, about 300,000 streetlights a few years ago, Boston, Philadelphia. We just wrapped up a project in Hawaii, the Bay Area. We're doing some work down in Texas. Just about every city or utility that we worked with knows where maybe about 70, 75% of their streetlights are. So there's a big gap in the data. And then what's underlying that data? What kind of fixture is there? What kind of light are they providing? It's not well known. So we've helped them close some of those gaps, collect a lot of data, provide a lot of insight, take a lot of photos. Everything we do is photo-based, so we get a real clear idea of what the underlying data means. With a lot of the work that we're doing, we've noticed that we've been in the news. There's a lot of discourse on street lighting. You might have seen those blue, purpley lights near you. Spoiler, they're not supposed to be there. You've seen a lot of LED conversions. People wake up, or they go outside one night and they see that the street lighting has changed. You can see a little differently. And the topic of light pollution has become a major topic. We're seeing 9% year-over-year increase in light pollution, which is significant and something that needs to be taken seriously and paired against a lot of these other priorities. We'll be talking about that. And of course, we're seeing an uptick year-over-year of nighttime related fatalities for pedestrians and cyclists. We're seeing this uptick year-over-year for the nighttime. We're not seeing the same trend in the daytime. Very recently in the United States, recently, but I believe it's November of 2021, the Federal Highway Administration listed street lighting as a proven safety countermeasure, which means you can get grant funding for street lighting for the express purpose of transportation safety projects. Has potential collision reduction of up to 42%, which is very significant. And frankly, a lot, among friends here, less politically non-viable is something like removing parking or a roundabout or some other scary thing like that. A lot of the transportation safety projects that we've seen have been really focused on, frankly, a lot more daytime initiatives. So we haven't seen the same benefit in the nighttime. It's something that we need to kind of take stock in and see what we can do to counteract. And I think street lighting is probably the primary source of that, counteracting this. One other data point I'll hit on is some of the research that we've been doing is that if you are hit by a vehicle in the United States in the nighttime, you're 5 times more likely to result in a fatality or a serious injury than you are in the daytime. Same type of collision, same locations, but we're noticing significantly different severities. Something serious that we have to deal with here. We're seeing the same uptick in your bicyclist fatalities. If you peel back the onion here, the research that we've done, you can say that it's for the same case here for bicyclists, we're seeing the same. In pedestrians, we're seeing that uptick in the nighttime. We've been able to dig into this a little deeper, and Kia set me up really beautifully for some of this research that we've done here. What we're finding is that about 80 to 85% of dusk and dawn related collisions that occurred during that time period are miscategorized. Miscategorized as either nighttime or daytime, largely because the on-scene officer to a collision is taking down a police report of that collision, and they probably have upwards of maybe 100 different things that they have to take note of. Where the sun was in the sky is probably pretty low on the list. Fair enough to say. But what we've been able to do is take the location of that collision, longitude and latitude, the time of day, which we know to be pretty accurate, and the date that it occurred. We built a tool that indexes that appropriately to where the angle of the sun was in the sky, and then what that categorization is across different times of twilight. And what we're finding is that approximately 20 to 25% of all active transportation or pedestrian involved and cyclist involved collisions are occurring within a 30 to 45 minute time period, just after the sun sets, as we're crossing from civil to nautical twilight. It's during this time period, this critical time period, 20 to 25% of all active transportation related collisions. I've talked about this to the lighting community. I've talked about this to the traffic engineering community. And it's a new concept. It's something that we don't really quite have an answer for yet, but it's important that we know this and that we bring it back to our cities, communities, and implement strategies that are unique to the cities that we live in, is that they are unique themselves. Most interesting, we only really see this occurring after the sun has set. We don't see this play out in the morning quite as much. And it seems to be independent of rush hour traffic. Peak hour of traffic is normally 4 to 6 p.m. We see it generally occurring after that period. Of course, it varies by time of year. And interestingly enough, that last graphic was for state of Tennessee. We're finding this everywhere we look. We've looked at about 50% of the United States. We've collected about 50% of the collision data nationwide over the last 5 years. We're starting to evaluate this a little further. We're seeing the same trend play out everywhere. Some next steps for us are to look internationally and see how this is playing out in other parts of the world. But we're seeing a trend here that there's something specifically going on just after the sun sets that needs to be reconciled. If there's one point I can really hit home here, which I think is really important, and it's a lesson to be shared about how we think about lighting, something someone told me very recently that really struck a chord. One lesson I'd really like you to take home with you. If you know anything about photography, you know this concept well. And it's that brighter lights make dark spots appear dark. And it really has to do with how the eye perceives light. The eye is really a legacy technology, something that we're all stuck with. It's not the best system. It's pretty amazing what it can do, but its ability to negotiate between well-lit and dark spots at night doesn't have the same ability to change between those zones very easily, particularly for older folks. As their eye ages, your ability to do that decreases significantly. We've seen a lot of LEDs come on the market over the last 10 years. They're often much brighter. The energy savings is pretty amazing. Well, allows us to provide a greater degree of lighting available to the public. However, with brighter lights in potentially fewer locations, because you're able to target that lighting better, we're seeing is potentially that by having fewer lights that are brighter, we're creating a scenario where you're shifting between light and dark spots and the eye is just not able to keep up, which might be a cause for a lot of what we're seeing in traffic collisions. One other important thing to note about lighting design, this might be getting a little in the weeds here, but it's important to note about how lighting design is provided. It's very important. It's not just about provide light. More lighting is not necessarily better. In some cases, less lighting might actually be an improvement, particularly as it comes to things like glare. What's important to note here is the difference between positive and negative contrast. If you've been in the stage or theater, you understand the concept of the silhouette effect. If you have a light on one side of the crosswalk versus the other, how it's illuminating that pedestrian will provide a much greater degree of contrast. Contrast is very important for being able to identify people or other hazards in the roadway. If there's something blocking the roadway, like a trash can or something like that, it allows a driver at speed to identify these. Same goes for cyclists. As far as lighting design goes for cyclists, there's really not much of what the standard guidance looks like, at least in the United States. It's something that the lighting community is working on and pulling together research to help answer this question. As a cyclist myself, I know some of the things that I really look for as I'm biking around at night: doors in a bike lane, hazards in the bike lane, steel grates for sewers. If you ever got your wheel stuck in one of those, you know what a bad day it looks like. And particularly, it's even harder at night when your vision's obscured. This is some slides that I stole from a colleague of mine, I think Shana Bramley of Michael Baker in New Jersey, about looking at some renderings of what illumination design looked like. So in this instance, we have 4 streetlights at an intersection, which is quite a bit. It's pretty good. We do see a pedestrian here. It's pretty well illuminated. It's easy to find. Interestingly enough, in this same image, there's another pedestrian. Wonder if anyone can find him. And it's shrouded by darkness based on where that light is. It's inhibiting our ability to identify where that pedestrian is in the crosswalk due to negative contrast. We can see another angle of that here as well. Balancing a lot of these competing priorities is becoming a challenge and something that our communities are starting to ask for. How do we balance things like traffic safety, where we might need more lighting, versus things like the environmental impact, whether that's light pollution or light trespass, light shining in a window, how that's interrupting flora and fauna or bird migration patterns. Are we providing lighting in an equitable manner? Does every community, every neighborhood within our cities have equal access to lighting? And at the core of that, does it reflect our community character? Something that we've been able to do is take all this streetlight data that we collect out in the field. VAR's collected data on over 3 million streetlights to date. We built digital twins of that in a GIS environment. So what we can do is just take the illumination profile of each individual streetlight and model that in GIS where most other data already lives. We can start making some comparisons and taking a deeper look at what's going on. And what we can do is model entire cities rather than just evaluating a street or two at a time. We can evaluate entire cities, how the street lighting is affecting the greater environment. And this is an example of the city of San Jose. We modeled about 65,000 streetlights. This is the illumination profile for all of those streetlights citywide. Looking a little closer, we can see an intersection here. This is in California. In California, crosswalks that are yellow denote that there's a school nearby. So we have a crosswalk, we have a bike lane on both sides of the street here. We have unprotected left turns. We have an offset street for the minor movements of the intersection. With the street light, you can tell that we have a pretty standard spacing down this street. They're approximately 300 feet spaced along this roadway. And what we can see pretty clearly here is that the light from this source is not quite hitting that crosswalk, potentially creating negative contrast or effectively not illuminating that pedestrian that might be crossing that crosswalk at all. We're able to look at this at scale, identify every crosswalk within the city. How does that pair against the illumination? And start making recommendations. If the warrants criteria for implementing street lighting for the purpose of traffic safety is 2 to 1. So if you have 2 to 1 nighttime to daytime collisions, the guidance for the Federal Highway Administration is such that lighting should be implemented. And we can take some of this information that we collected. There's a photo of a street light that we took for a project in the city of Santa Ana in Southern California. Quantify what that data actually means. Evaluate that at the bike lane. What is the illumination provided in the bike lanes or the crosswalks or the sidewalks? And here you can see these areas in blue denote that there's very little lighting available. Potential trip hazards that aren't distinguishable. Some minor changes in the lighting here could provide better lighting to people walking, feeling more comfortable in their own environment. Light trespass, is there light shining in on windows or in the private land that shouldn't be there otherwise? We look at street trees. How might lighting be impacted by street trees, further sequestered from providing lighting that's intended? We can look at many different metrics. We can zoom out and do this at citywide scales. The project that we did here in the city of Santa Ana, we looked at 9,000 different crosswalks. We know where all the crosswalks are. We know where all the streetlights are. We know how much street lighting is being provided at those crosswalks. I look at where our collisions are happening and then provide a list to the city that says these are the crosswalks that need to be improved in order based on some criteria, equity metrics and other things, and build that into a capital improvement project or secure grant funding from the federal government to make these improvements to create a more safe environment. Ultimately, all of these recommendations are consolidated to plan. Streetlight master planning, as I said, is not a new concept, but it's either been very much an architectural focused, high-minded ideals, not a lot of concrete recommendations, or on the other side, really just an inventory list, an electrical engineering diagram of these are what our streetlights look like. Again, not really focused on recommendations for improving that infrastructure. And I'll wrap up here with a couple of maps of some of the work that we do, evaluating street lighting across cities. What does the illumination look like by neighborhood? Are we providing this in an equitable manner? Are there reasons to have less lighting in certain places? In most cases, I'd say most of our commercial districts where we have nightlife are underlit. They don't feel inviting. They might feel scary. Whereas our residential neighborhoods are overlit. We don't want to make them inviting. We don't want people coming in there that otherwise have no business to be. Getting that right is important. We can look at disadvantaged neighborhoods by a variety of different metrics, or historical redlining. We can look at overall environmental quality. We can look at health indices. Is there areas of a city that have lower access to healthy environments? Could providing better street lighting make you feel more comfortable walking in your own neighborhood? As we know, walking is very good for you. You can look at a variety of local community needs specific to any city. You can look at senior populations. Are we considering the needs of those specific groups? You can look at nighttime collisions. Where are those areas? We don't necessarily want to light an entire city for traffic safety. We want to do it in targeted locations because we have to balance these different priorities. Look at 311 calls on street lighting. Are there certain areas that have deteriorating infrastructure that need to be taken into consideration? We can even look at crime. Crime is something that we're always asked about. It's on a lot of people's minds because the nighttime is scary. People are scared of the dark. I was scared of the dark into my 20s. So I definitely understand that. But the data shows us there's not really quite a relationship. And we're seeing some more research coming out of Europe that's basically saying the same thing. Don't necessarily see a correlation. What we do see is a correlation between the presence of street lighting and people's comfort. If you're a student of Jane Jacobs, for example, a great American planner, the more people you have out at night walking around, more eyes you have on the street, the safer you feel and the safer that environment becomes. And it's a deterrence to crime. So we do see a relationship there, but presence of street lighting and the incidence of crime, we don't quite see that same correlation play out. And of course, at the core of this, community engagement is very important. Asking community, what do they want? You'll hear very different answers depending on where people live. It's important that we ask them and provide recommendations that meet the unique needs of unique communities. And lastly, we boil this all down into an implementation plan that evaluates all these different competing needs and ultimately provides recommendations where we might want to increase lighting or not increase, or even in some cases, decrease lighting. This is my last slide. I'll leave you with this. Some final thoughts. Kiara, I think we had some similar thoughts on closing our presentations with a similar slide. There's definitely more interest than ever in street lighting. There's more money available now via LED conversion. We're saving money on energy costs. There's new grants available with better data to support these answers. We still have inconsistent guidance. IES and the ASTRO manuals in the United States have different criteria of what quality lighting looks like. It's important that we answer that for ourselves on the local level, as well as, the final piece, particularly in the United States, is incongruence between utilities and municipalities and what their values are. Is difficult to navigate. A lot of cities feel as though their hands are tied when it comes to making improvements to their street lighting infrastructure. But when it comes to things like transportation safety, the truth is that you do have the power to make change and implement lighting design that creates safer environments. And the dividends that pays is significant. Street lighting is relatively cheap. The analysis that we've done is that the benefit to cost ratio is 20 to 1. A $10,000 investment in street lighting equates to $200,000 of value delivered to the community. That's my presentation. This QR will take you to my LinkedIn. I'm happy to continue the conversation. If you got anything wrong, please let me know, or if you disagree with something, happy to talk about it more.
That cost evaluation is a powerful message to close with. Thank you, Nick, so much. Here's what I want to do. We've got a little time left for a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask a big question. Why aren't those we've talked about two different things. We talked about pedestrians in the day and trying to extract ourselves from the car culture, particularly in the States, and the comparisons that Kia gave about what's happening in the States compared to Canada, very eye-opening when there are similar other kind of qualities. So we've talked about that, and we've also talked about then all of this layered into the nighttime space. But why aren't those who walk, roll, and bike at night getting the adequate attention? Even in your report, Kiara, you mentioned that we haven't quite done that study, one study in relationship to the night. why aren't we there yet? Is it just that we're just now awakening to the fact that we've got this whole nighttime part, the other half of the day we need to pay attention to, and climate change is coming and more people are going to be active at night? Why aren't we getting the attention at night? Anybody know? Somebody want to weigh in?
What perspective I have is that as a civil engineer, all your site walks are done in the daytime.
Yeah.
You're at work in the daytime.
Yep.
You're thinking
We
about.
were at work in the daytime. More of us are now.
That's true. I live in Portland, Oregon. It gets dark pretty early there, so plenty of nighttime working. But your focus is on the daytime and the needs of that time period, particularly in the United States. Traffic engineering design is designed for the worst 15 minutes of the day.
Right.
To evaluate that throughput of how much traffic you need to sustain. The other 23 hours and 45 minutes are secondary, which equates to higher speeds. And it hasn't been made a priority. And I think it's up to the cities and states and federal government to promote this and identify incentives and reasons to offset purely making capacity adjustments to put more cars through the road, but also pair that against the value of traffic safety and other elements of the environment.
Kia or Kiara, do either of you have a Kia?
Yeah, if I could just, I heard the question as being a little bit broader about why are pedestrians and cyclists and other vulnerable road users not getting attention at any time of the day?
Right.
And my answer to that is trillions of dollars in lobbying and a century worth of like automotive interests and associated industries, which includes most of American developers,
right,
making it so that automobility, which is what I call the system of cultural, political, and other forces that are making cars our default, is intact. And so we don't think about things like, crossing the street in an improper way becomes jaywalking. That was a term that was invented by automakers in the 1930s, and they created an entire newswire that went about creating car crash reports for newspapers that made the pedestrian look like they were at fault and made words like mobility synonymous with driving. Those sort of things didn't happen by accident. They happened as a result of a lot of money, a lot of people in power making it so. And it can be undone in the same way. It just is going to take, in my opinion, a massive grassroots effort.
I agree. As a grassroots guy, I'm kind of there with you on this. Kiara, do you have any other additional point to make?
I completely agree. I think it's a cultural problem. And I see also in Paris, where, as I told you, we have lots of trips by walk, much more than by car. So we should say we have more data and studies and information about pedestrians than about car drivers, but it's not. Because probably we were used to collect data, information, to study the motorized mobility, and we do not have enough information, disposal data, and we are not used to. So we are building all this kind of information and of knowledge, and I think that it's starting, and it will get better when we will be able to say how pedestrian, which kind of problem they have by night, accepted from road safety. We have other problems also, and we have to know it, and then we will manage how to improve the situation. But we really have a big work everywhere in Paris also to better know this mobility, especially by night, and especially for some groups of people which have specific problem or characteristics.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Streetsblog, we're going to wrap up here so we get closer to an hour. But Streetsblog, you just reran an article that was printed originally in Governing magazine about just as there aren't people adequately measuring when night begins, as Nick talked about, there's also reports are not adequately representing people who have mobility needs or transport. That's not getting recorded. And so we really don't know. We really don't know how many of the people with pedestrian deaths or pedestrian injuries are the result that these are people that have used canes or had visual impairment of some type or were in a wheelchair. So to me, the answer is in this nighttime community that I have been working in since 2015, that the advocates working to improve and make the night more inclusive and more vibrant and safer for all need to set a few fires under some asses, pardon my language, to raise the attention on the nighttime space and pedestrian safety and bicyclist safety, and trying to extract ourselves from the world of cars, even at night. Businesses, you will survive. I think Paris is a perfect example that if we enhance more pedestrian activity at night, the businesses are doing quite well, thank you. And just because somebody can't park their Ford F-350 right in front of your business doesn't mean your business is going to go down the tubes. That's my final message. I want to thank Kiara, Nick, Kia. Thank you so much. This webinar will be posted on the 24 Hour Nation website within a day. It will also be posted on the usa.streetsblog.org website, as Kia has requested it be. Perhaps I can get those slides from you, Kiara, and I will add those to my post. And I thank Isaac with Ivari Labs for connecting me with you, Nick. I also thank Thierry Chalois, who's the nighttime economy or the night czar for the city of Paris, for connecting me with you, Kara. And Kia, I got you just out of a cold call saying, I need Streetsblog's perspective on this whole topic. Thank you so very much. And for those of you who have stuck with us so long, thank you for registering for this particular webinar. This has been a 24 Hour Nation program. This is what we do. We just elevate the attention of our nighttime economies in our cities and how we can make them safer, more inclusive, and more vibrant at night. My name is Randall White. Thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.